So it's my pleasure now to introduce Dr. Johanna Yletyinen, who's
Beautiful.
a postdoc, at Canterbury University. Over to you.
Yeah, thanks all for being here. This presentation has 3 parts. I will briefly introduce what tipping points are, then I tell what we are doing in our project, which is led by Jason Tulianakis, and then I give you one case study as an example of tipping points in New Zealand. And tipping points have many names, and these are the ones I had in my head. I'm sure there are more. And this is because in many disciplines, people have noticed that complex systems sometimes have these big shifts to different states. And all of these terms here explain the same kind of event. And there are many definitions to tipping points. I put one here, which is very basic. And this is quite classic way of explaining a tipping point. So this ball that I have in the system is your system. And the state is its identity and functioning and structure. So this system is under pressure, and it's all right for it to change. It can roll around in this valley a bit. But when the pressure gets too strong, it's pushed on top of this hill to the tipping point, the critical threshold. And just like a ball on top of a hill, if you now push it even a little bit, it will roll down to a new state. So new identity, new functioning, new structure. And usually there's also a positive feedback reinforcing this change. And what's not so nice is that there's usually also hysteresis, which means that, as you can see, the valley is a little bit deeper. It takes more effort to get back to the state where you came from. And the pressure, it can be gradual increase in pressure. It can be a shock like forest fire, or it can be a change in the environment. So the valley can lift up and the ball will roll. If this was tricky, I'll give you a metaphor. So think what happens when you're peacefully paddling on a river, and what happens between that and being on bottom of the waterfall. And then you have exactly the same pattern there, as I just explained. I put some examples of tipping points here in ecological and social systems. And tipping points are not rare. They have been reported in different systems worldwide. We have had a couple of tipping points in news lately in New Zealand. One is the waterways that we have been talking about. And the other one is, for example, antibiotic resistance. And we have also noticed that Environmental Defense Society is giving an entire conference on tipping points for resource management, industries, and politicians. First I should comment this figure. Never mind the network underneath. I put it here just to show you the diversity of ecosystem services that we can lose. And now this figure is only on our work on marine ecosystems. So when we have been looking at the ecosystem events, we have found some generalities in them. And one is that they often come to us as a surprise. We usually notice only afterwards that we have gone through the tipping point. The early warning signals that we have at the moment, they are not very reliable, and they tend to come a little bit too late. So if we go back to the paddling example, at what point do you realize that you're actually going towards a waterfall? And in real life, at that time, you don't only need to paddle really fast backwards or turn around, but you also need to convince all the policymakers that there's actually a tipping point ahead and design management. We usually lose ecosystem services immediately, and as we are putting more and more pressure on nature, we are predicting that the tipping points will increase in frequency. Some tipping points are positive, and I will talk about that in the case study. So what is our project going to do? Since New Zealand is under local and global pressure, New Zealand's nature and natural resources, we want to ask what kind of tipping points will we see here, or will we see them? How can we do something to avoid them, or can we organize some positive tipping point, like the predator-free in New Zealand? And what we are doing here is that we are modeling humans and nature as one system. So we are stepping away from this artificial separation of humans and nature. And as you can see, there are feedbacks even between the social and ecological component. And one thing that is a bit tricky with social ecological systems is that we tend to keep the ecosystem very close to the threshold, this tipping point. And as we have more dynamics here, we have social dynamics, ecological, and social ecological, we tend to have more thresholds, which means more tipping points. So the aim of our project is to provide knowledge provide knowledge to predict and reverse tipping points in New Zealand. We want to find ways to remove barriers and find key leverage points for restoring ecosystems. And we are doing this by 4 approaches. We are using systems analysis and models. We are exploring and implementing Maori-related concepts, not Maori-related, tipping point-related Maori concepts. We are doing field work, and then we try to synthesize our findings for generalities. And the last part is then about this case study that we are working with. Loss of habitat seems to be the greatest or one of the greatest threats for biodiversity. And it seems that species respond to loss of habitats non-linearly. So ecologists have found that there are these tipping points or critical thresholds, that if you have a certain area of native habitat, for example, then the species will do it, or will make it. Or if you have a certain connectivity between habitat fragments, then the species will survive. And looking at this from the social ecological perspective, we start by noticing that many pristine ecosystems have actually been converted to agriculture or other human landscapes. So we need to include people into this research. And here I put some of the concepts into the social ecological figure. And what has also been noticed that social networks that we all are embedded in can be more important in resource management than the governmental or other official institutions. So what we want to know is that how does your social network affect your capacity to reach a positive tipping point? And who are the key people in these kind of social components? And then we also want to see the feedback from the ecological system back to the social component. So this is our idea, to build a model that will explore the capacity of the social component to reach an ecological tipping point. We want to make social networks of different governance type. So we can study, for example, what is the role of scientists, how do they influence the land users, or for example, iwi in a position where they could have a better influence, and should we maybe go through them? So we try to find new pathways. And how this is done in practice is that we will link social networks to agent-based modeling. So we have farmers' survey from land care research, where we can extract data for who farmers have talked to, how influential do they think it was, and what kind of topics they have talked to. We use that to build networks. This is not the network, this is another example of the structure of it. And from these networks, we get data from the agent-based modeling, where each farmer makes a decision of either protecting or not protecting native habitat. And we then compare these different governance types on their ability to reach these native habitat tipping thresholds, the area or the connectivity. And what I really like with this is that there are many studies on social network analysis and resource management, but here we are doing this direct link to the ecosystem impact, and I haven't seen that done so often. So we want to see, do they get to the tipping point, or how close, and what affects them? And what we hope this study to contribute is that we get a quantitative method for social ecological systems and tipping points. We want to study how a positive tipping point can be orchestrated through social component. We will get some insights on agricultural social ecological systems and collective action in general. And just a couple of weeks ago, there was what I thought was a really good review on Science about why don't we people do environmental action. And one thing that was really highly emphasized in this study was that we need to create conditions where there's possibilities for collective action, like Eddie was talking yesterday, it doesn't really seem to work to educate individuals people. And that is exactly what we are doing in this study. We are trying to find these collective action patterns. So thank you all for listening. I would also like to thank my collaborators for this study and all the participants of our project. And then Bev will give another example of the tipping points.
So we do have time for a couple of questions. We're right on time now. Any questions for Johanna?
No.
It doesn't look like you're going to get any.
No, it's all right.
Okay. Right. Thank you.